I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and that is the updated for 2023 BMW X7. And my dirty little secret is that I love the BMW X7. Unlike so many large SUVs, the X7 is actually very desirable and engaging to drive. And you can tell that BMW put their A team of engineering into the development of this vehicle. Ignore the size and scale of the thing, the X7 is one of the very best BMWs in the brand's current lineup. And in this video, I'm going to explain why. But I'm also going to tell you how the X7 is far from perfect, especially at its new 2023 LCI pricing. This one is the xDrive 40DM Sport, which starts at $174,900. Just 5 years ago, when the X7 first launched in Australia, it started at $119,900. Prices have escalated 45% to get into a BMW X7, which is enormous, even factoring in inflation and the pandemic that has intervened. So why is this car so much more expensive? And is it still a product that you'd consider buying, despite the fact that this vehicle I've brought along is $198,000 on the road, an awful lot of money for a BMW. In today's video, I'm going to reveal the answer. But before we get started, hit subscribe. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by One of the main reasons that the BMW X7 is $60,000 more expensive now than it was in 2018 is because BMW have scrapped the base model version of this car, which certainly didn't look as fancy outside, but had an honest solidity to it that I found very appealing. Now, of course, it's no longer 2018, and we can't expect 2018 prices after rampant inflation and a pandemic have intervened. So I am understanding of this stuff. But as it sits here, this particular X7 is about $198,000 drive away, which is plenty of coin when you can get into a pretty nice Audi Q7 for considerably less money than this, not to mention something really great like a Volvo XC90. So BMW have positioned this larger vehicle as a more luxurious option as well. So does that stack up in the cabin for a BMW that does wear hallowed 7 badging? Well, it isn't a 7 Series. This made in America SUV is not at that level of plushness or opulence, but it is designed and styled to try and get close to it. So in this LCI facelifted version of the X7, we've got BMW's new large curved display with a 14.9-inch touchscreen here in the center. And we still have these beautifully made and damped iDrive controls down here to use as shortcuts. The climate controls have unfortunately been migrated into the screen, where they're considerably less easy to use. But once you get your head around that, BMW's infotainment is still some of the best in the business, even if the digital screen in front of the driver isn't as customizable or as high quality as that in an Audi Q7. We still have the same steering wheel as the pre-facelift version, beautiful stitched leather in the center, it's round, and it does feel expensive. And expensive is how the X7 feels, generally speaking. Build quality is superb in this vehicle, and that's been the case in every X7 that I've driven of this generation. And material selection is lovely too. Merino leather is now standard in the X7. Another reason this vehicle is so expensive is because BMW Australia have just thrown virtually all the options at this car as standard. There are still a few things left on the options list, but few of them are consequential. One that I would consider is the $8,500 Bowers & Wilkins 3D Diamond Stereo, which delivers a fantastic audiophile experience, though the standard Harman Kardon stereo still sounds pretty good. You get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, with a rock-solid connection in our testing, and in here, largely, everything just works. The ergonomics of BMW interiors continue to be excellent, and the seat is comfortable and supportive. It has massaging and heating and lots of adjustment, but you have to pay extra for seat cooling, which is a real surprise and disappointment at this price. But how's the spec of this interior with beautiful Tartufo colored merino leather? Very lush. I also like the wood trim, and that slides back to reveal lots of storage here and wireless charging. A reasonably deep bin in the center with USB-C, and big door bins too. All in all though, it doesn't feel like you're driving a bus, and that's one of the best things about the X7. Let's check out the second row, where this car has an interesting option. This X7 has been specified with captain seats in the second row, which is a $1,500 option, and money well spent in my opinion if you don't need to max out the 7-seat capacity of this vehicle. It does take the seat count to 6, but it means that in the second row, you've got a proper seat for both of the outboard chairs, and comfort levels are high, particularly because you also get these sumptuous cushions. So it's some indulged kids that get to sit in the back of this car. But it also means that walking through to the third row is a cinch. You just sort of push these armrests up and then they get out of the way, a bit like on a plane, and you don't have to mess around with folding seats and that sort of stuff, which is nice. You also get a console down here, you get cup holders, and intelligently, it's made out of hard plastic. One of the only times I'll say that, because this thing is going to get a kicking. It's also really screwed in well to the floor, so that doesn't seem to cause a problem if you do brush past it with your foot. You also get a quad zone climate system in this car, so both outboard passengers can set their desired temperature. You've got fan controls and you've got air vents back here too. Beautiful roof lining in this vehicle. And you've also got BMW's system where you can buy like iPad holders and stuff like that from them that slot into these little holes here, and you've got a USB-C port right next to it in both front seats. So many nice details down to the quilting of the map pockets. You've also got lovely leather on the doors. You've got sunshades that come up at the press of a button. I mean, they have made this car awfully expensive, but in a lot of ways, it feels top tier and top class inside, and probably a step nicer than something like a Q7 or even an XC90, one of my old favorites. Room on offer, very good. Legroom's excellent, turroom's excellent too, and headroom is great because this is a tall car with a tall roof, so even when you have a panoramic sunroof, it's no issue for tall people in the back. But what about the third row? The X7 is really long, so you're going to want to check that it's actually going to fit in your garage, but that does mean that the third row, and I'll just move into the center so you can see, the third row is better than most. The backs of the second row seats have good cutouts on them, so your legroom is actually relatively well preserved. And you can see that for myself, I do actually have headroom thanks to a cutout behind the sunroof. And before I said that this car had quad zone climate, well, this might be the first car I've ever seen with quintuple zone climate, because I've got temperature and fan control back here in the third row. Wow. There's also cup holders back here too. And amazingly, even the door tops, window sills, whatever you'd call this in the back, is all still covered in soft materials, so it does feel pretty plush. As I mentioned at the beginning of today's video, the X7 that I've brought along for you today is the M Sport version of the standard diesel engine. That's the one most Australians are probably going to go for. But there is also the option of the luxury spec design pure excellence, which amps up the chrome on the outside and looks a little bit less athletic and a bit more luxurious. Some people will prefer that. The color of this car is Dravit Grey. From afar, it can look like a plain battleship mid-grey, but get up close to it and get the car in the sun, and this color has an absolutely gorgeous amber gold brown fleck that reveals a little bit more character than you might have first expected. I'd probably go tanzanite blue, and there is a deep red, which is nice too. Now, having a look at the back, the styling has not changed much from the pre-facelift version of the car, unlike the front, and that's fine. I think the honest, square, blocky lines of the X7 make a lot of sense for the purpose of this vehicle. And as you can see, this one is outfitted for towing as well. It's got a 2,200 kilo brake towing capacity. It's also got one of my favorite features of any SUV or wagon, a split tailgate. So power operation, of course, for both components, including the lower. That gets out of your way, and it's beautiful and plushly carpeted. So, you know, for Johnny's rugby game, you've got your own little seat right here. You've also got 300 litres of cargo capacity, even with all seats in place, which is fantastic. So you'll get all the school bags and sport bags and stuff back here, but fold down those third row seats, which is easily done at the touch of a button, rather than requiring you to put in any manual labor whatsoever. And they drop out of the way and create a very significant boot, which is much larger than that of the X5. If you also drop down the second row seats, you're getting over 2,000 litres of space, which is going to be useful for carting around furniture, for instance. Then it's simply the touch of a button to close up that split tailgate, and that's going to lead us on to another area where you're going to have to open your wallet: running costs. When you purchase a 2.5-ton large luxury SUV, you shouldn't go into that experience thinking that the car will be cheap to run. But the X7 is not as bad as the Mercedes-Benz GLS in this regard. that starts with a reasonably priced servicing plan, which covers the first 5 years of servicing for $2,800 as the initial outlay. But as the fine print points out, that doesn't include things like brake replacement that a big bus, a heavy bus like this, is probably going to need before 5 years are up. The warranty is 5 years with unlimited kilometers as of the start of 2023 for BMW in Australia. And the fuel economy is actually surprisingly reasonable. BMW claims 8 litres per 100 Ks for this 6-cylinder diesel. In reality, you'll get 10, maybe low teens if you're pushing on. But because it has an 80-litre fuel tank, your driving range is going to be really good. On the highway, you should expect to see 1,000 kilometres of range out of this family hauler, and that's what I'm talking about. But you also need to budget for things like tyres. Just check out the tyres on the back of this vehicle. 3 15mm wide, 23 inches in size. Don't go for the 23s, just don't do it to yourself. But even the standard wheel and tire package is 22 inches on this car. So if you want to keep the X7 on good quality rubber, you need to budget in significant outlay on things like tires. And lastly, to insurance. In the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $2,225 to comprehensively insure a new BMW X7. Everybody's situation varies and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you garage the car, and your driving history. Much of the genius of the BMW X7 comes down to the way this vehicle drives. And that's because it's a bit of an unspoken truth that so many of the large family vehicles that are sold in Australia, even if they do wear a luxury badge, are just not that great to drive. Even the ones that are reasonably good are still not really a car that you would jump into as a keen driver and actually want to drive around, like out of choice. And the X7 is an exception to that rule. And that's because I think it's really clear that when BMW was engineering this vehicle, they put some of their best minds onto it, because they've landed on a very large wagon which fits the whole family and all their stuff. It's a big, heavy vehicle, and yet it still has more than a modicum of driver engagement. And trust me, I was surprised too. It starts with the cluster architecture platform, which is shared by virtually every BMW from the 3 Series and Z4 at the small end right up to this X7. It's rigid, and it's just a seriously solid platform in terms of driving dynamics. It's rear biased, but of course the X7 has a standard all-wheel drive. It's still a rear biased X-Drive all-wheel drive system though, and you'd find that the X7 is quite a lot more competent when pedaled hard on a curvy road than you might expect, belying its massive size and 2.5-ton weight. And those are just the weights that you find in this kind of segment. This car isn't particularly overweight in that regard, although it could always be a little bit lighter. But then there's the fine tuning of the suspension and the handling in this car, which really strikes the right chord. It's quite uncanny how BMW have managed to get the X7 to drive much more like it's a 5 Series Touring or perhaps an X3 than a bona fide XC90 or GLS competitor, because those cars, while they're both good examples of their type, neither of them are truly engaging for a driver. But it's the mid-weighted, intuitive ratio steering rack, actually some of BMW's best steering at the moment. It's the level air ride, which manages to be quite an ideal blend of compliance and body control. And the fact that all of the control surfaces just have this equal seeming weight to them, which makes this car easy to corner in. And in fact, it's one of these rare large cars where stringing corners together feels intuitive and comes naturally. And that means that even if the X7 is like your boring practical family car, when you do have to jump into this thing and do 1,000 Ks on a family road trip behind the wheel, you're still going to find something to enjoy rather than seeing it as a chore. And I love that about the X7. But there are still some choices that you can make to enhance this vehicle. And the biggest recommendation that I have for you is just stay away from the 23-inch wheel option when you're ticking boxes for this car. Just don't do it. Friends don't let friends buy a BMW X7 on 23-inch wheels. Now, they don't ruin the ride, but what they do is they dilute the ride quality from being uncannily good to being just a little bit marginal and average. There's just too much wheel, not enough tire here in the X7, and you start to feel bumps in the road that you just don't feel in standard form. And it's not like 22s look small and and a bit crappy and a bit cheap, do they? That's still a massive wheel. Like, you're not missing out by going for the 22. So just restrain yourself to that and you'll be getting a really solidly driving car. That's the case whether you go for the M Sport, like this car, or the Design Pure Excellence, which drives pretty much the same as this vehicle, also on adaptive air suspension. Now the engine is an interesting one because the pre-facelift X7 actually had a better engine than this car. Not more powerful, not more torquey, not as quick, but better. How's that possible? Well, you know, so many things in life, just because they are better on paper, it doesn't actually make them better in reality. Let me explain. So the old X7, or the pre-facelift X7, also had a 3-litre single turbo diesel 6-cylinder inline 6 as its base engine. It was called the xDrive 30D, and it had 195 kilowatts of power and 620 Newton meters of torque. And that was a great amount for the X7. It was by no means slow. In fact, it was keeping up with sports cars when we used to use them as support vehicles on shoots. But the engine was distant, yet it sounded good. It had very low levels of turbo lag. It was smooth as silk. Everybody loved it. It was a darling, the X7 xDrive 30D. Even people that pretended to hate the X7 would drive that car and be like, okay, yeah, I get it. This is awesome. Now with the facelift, the X7 has gone to the xDrive 40D, which is a mechanically altered version of the same engine. We now have 259 kilowatts of power, which is a massive jump over the old car, and 720 Newton meters of torque, which is a more marginal increase. But in order to get to that point, BMW have messed with some of the things that made the previous version of the X7 so sweet and slick to drive. There's a peaky character to the engine now, which makes it more difficult to drive this car smoothly at low speeds. The engine certainly has more response, which is nice at higher speeds. The X7 feels even more athletic than it used to, but it sort of jumps off the line. It feels more laggy and peaky and not as desirable to drive smoothly and slowly as the old xDrive 30D, and that's a shame. Likewise, the petrol engine has also been upgraded, and we now have an M60i petrol V8 in the X7, which I haven't tested in facelifted form. It was always sweet before the facelift came along, the petrol V8, and you can get that car on 22s. What there isn't is a petrol 6-cylinder. The Americans get one, the Germans get one, the Australians do not get one. And I have a feeling that the 40i straight 6 petrol would be the sweetest of them all for the X7, so I'd love to see BMW adopt that in future. Someone must have heard me, because days after filming this X7 review, BMW Australia decided to add the petrol inline 6 in the 40i. 280 kilowatts of power, 520 Newton meters of torque, and it's $7 cheaper than the diesel. Sounds good, looking forward to testing one soon. But otherwise, stay away from the 23s, and what you're getting is a superb riding, serene, refined, delightful large SUV to drive that goes a really long way to justifying this car's higher price. So that was an in-depth look at the updated 2023 BMW X7 with the xDrive 40D engine in M Sport trim. To be completely honest with you, I think BMW is seriously testing the friendship with where they've pushed the price of this large luxury SUV to. I think 200 grand on the road is a lot of coin for a BMW SUV. It's nice, sure, but this is no super luxury vehicle. That being said, BMW Australia have been savvy at throwing considerable specification at this vehicle as standard, probably because local Aussie buyers tend to tick almost all the option boxes when that stuff isn't included with the standard vehicle. So it does make sense to me, even if I wish there was still the X-Line base model at a much sharper price. So to answer the question that I posed at the start of this video, would I still buy the BMW X7 even at 2023 prices? Yes, if money wasn't a significant consideration. Forget the super luxury stuff. The BMW X7 is simply better to drive than its rivals in the Mercedes GLS and the Audi Q7. It has engaging handling, excellent ride quality if you avoid these 23-inch wheels and just stick with the standard 22s. It's got a reasonably good engine, if not quite as good as before, excellent performance and real serenity. I love to drive the X7. And if I had to have a big bus like this, I'd want to enjoy driving it rather than finding it a chore. And that's what the X7 does for you. But that privilege now costs an awful lot of money. Keen to know your opinion though, so please let me know down below this video what you think of the BMW X7. Would you buy one? Would you consider something else in this space? And while you're down there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.